Hello again, I'm Lee Sales from 7:30. Earlier this year, the case of former Liberal staffer Brittany Higgins caused an almost immediate outpouring of anger from Australian women of all ages, political views and cultural and economic backgrounds. In the second part of our special series, looking at what caused this particular case at this time to cause such an uproar, we focus on sexual harassment in the workplace and violence in the home. The producers were Kirsten Robb and Laura Francis.
The retail giant David Jones has been slapped with a multi-million-dollar sexual harassment lawsuit.
The room was packed this morning as Christy Fraser-Kirk had her first day in court.
I am a young woman standing here today simply because I said it wasn't okay.
The 31-page statement of claim details allegations of the boss's public lustings, including groping and kissing and repeated requests for sex at his Bondi apartment.
Mr McInnes resigned after admitting he had behaved in a manner unbecoming.
Mr McGuinness and the board agreed that his employment to be mutually terminated.
Christy Fraser-Kirk is seeking $37 million in compensation.
The money makes him look more like a gold digger.
We often see women put on trial.
They'd really started attacking her personally.
The girl was not raped and molested.
It seems like just yesterday, really.
That's the program for tonight. Thanks for your company. One reason women are fed up is that stories of workplace harassment and violence come up all the time. I've been covering them on 7:30 for more than a decade. And of course, for every story that does capture the media's attention, there are countless more that don't. Years before the Me Too movement, one workplace sexual harassment case had a seismic impact on corporate Australia.
Hey, Christy, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, perfect.
Come on, get out of the way.
Christy Fraser-Kirk was a 25-year-old publicity coordinator at David Jones when she complained about the behaviour of the company's CEO, Mark McInnes, at two work events. When it wasn't resolved internally, she sued Mr McInnes, David Jones and its 9 directors for $37 million in punitive damages, a figure that Ms Fraser-Kirk said she'd give to charity.
I have tried my best to have this matter resolved fairly and with justice.
The case ultimately settled out of court and the damages claim was dropped. Mark McInnes has always denied the claims made against him and claimed the court action was an abusive process. 7:30 made multiple attempts to contact Mr McInnes but were unable to speak to him directly. In a statement, David Jones said the historical case is in no way reflective of its values and it does not tolerate harassment of any nature. Christy Fraser-Kirk, it's more than a decade since your case involving David Jones. How differently or otherwise do you think that that matter would be viewed or handled today?
Yeah, wow, 10 years. I think, quite honestly, if David Jones had this on their doorstep right now, I would hope that it would be handled very differently. I mean, in my circumstance, it was pretty brutal for what I had to go through. And a company that really, in those sorts of scenarios, all you really want is support and to be protected from something like this.
How would you describe the way that you were treated by the media at the time, and what kind of message do you think that that sent women or employees who had ever contemplated perhaps stepping up and making a complaint?
Look, I really don't think that we want to scaremonger women anymore, and my situation was horrific, to say the least. Clearly, people weren't really ready for a 25-year-old blonde woman coming up the ranks, you know, junior publicist, to kind of call out and say, that's not right. And for somebody, I guess, who had a public apology, why then was I scrutinised so heavily by the media? My personal life, you know, being attacked, any sort of area that they could find to discredit me was really, really confronting for a 25-year-old woman.
What impact did that have on you and what sort of got you through that?
Look, it was devastating, but I grew up being told to call out when something was wrong. So actually, when it happened to me. I didn't think none of the wiser. I thought, oh, well, this is what's happened. This shouldn't happen. Go to your middle management, report it. And the backlash that then ensued after that was pretty incredible. I had no idea the sort of media storm and public attention that this would have. And although Mark McGuinness absolutely apologised publicly and to me personally, which I accepted, there needs to be greater accountability. When my situation happened before the Me Too movement, nobody really got it. And now there's a little change of ear and a change of tune, which is refreshing. But we've got a lot of work to do. I think it's safe to say that boys' clubs should be worried, because that was me 10 years ago. I'm still knocking on that door, still banging on that glass ceiling now, and it's not going to go away.
Though Pahari was promoted despite an allegation of sexual harassment.
Today, the Prime Minister was defending his minister for calling Brittany Higgins a lying cow.
Judge Dyson Hayden has had 6 allegations of sexual harassment by 6 different women.
Earlier this year, it was here at Sydney's Town Hall that thousands of women rallied in protest after the Brittany Higgins case ignited national fury. There were rallies all over the country. Hers was just the latest in a steady stream of appalling stories. But the reason that it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back is that so many women from all sorts of economically and culturally diverse backgrounds have had the experience of being sexually harassed or worse in their places of work or education. 1 in 2 women has experienced sexual harassment in her lifetime. 1 in 5 has experienced sexual violence after the age of 15. Almost 2 in 5 women have faced sexual harassment in the workplace. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are more likely to experience it, as are women with a disability. The workplace situation is so concerning that the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, authored the Respect at Work report to expose the full extent of what's happening and why.
It came about because we had seen in the US the Harvey Weinstein reporting, and it was sort of the conversation in Australia, the Me Too conversation started happening around dinner tables here.
How common is the tendency for organisations to want to impose secrecy, such as non-disclosure agreements, to protect their reputations?
Up until now, it has been standard practice. Actually, what you were buying as an employer was silence, so your reputation was preserved so that it didn't affect your talent recruitment.
And what's been the effect of that?
The effect has been employers have taken a blanket confidentiality approach. They haven't been learning right through the board lessons from cases that have gone in the past. They've also had some people become repeat offenders.
How many people do actually complain?
Only 17% of people who experience sexual harassment made a complaint. The systems in place in the laws currently really rely on individuals to make complaints before any action's taken. So they're not putting the burden on employers to stop sexual harassment. They're really putting the burden on the victims to complain about it. And so that has resulted in an environment where I think employers and perpetrators are more interested to suppress the complaint than to stop the sexual harassment.
Christy Fraser-Kirk now juggles motherhood with her career as a busy London executive. She manages a team herself, and that's part of the reason she decided to speak about her case on television for the first time. How would you hope things would look for your daughter when she enters the workforce?
You know, Lee, I wouldn't have done this interview had it not been for my daughter. And, you know, I realise that even still 10 years or whatever it is from now, I'm still a little bit fearful of what people will think. And that's not a message that I would send to anybody in my team, And more importantly, it's not the message that I would send to my daughter. So as hard as this path is to trailblaze sometimes, you got to suck it up, because that generation deserves more.
Christy Fraser-Kirk was a young woman when she bravely spoke up, and it's young women stepping up again.
My name is Maddie Fitzpatrick. I'm 24. I think among my friendship circles, it's more likely that someone's experienced sexual assault or abuse than it is for them to have not had any of those experiences. The turning point for me, and a pretty pivotal point when I realised that I had been sexually abused, was when I was sitting in a talk in Year 12 when I first learnt the word consent. In Year 12, and I walked away from it and burst into tears, and I could list over 10 different things that had happened to me. I had a boss who was basically sexually abusing me. It started just with small sexual comments. The sexual comments did escalate to touching. You know, we're learning at school that rape is going to occur from someone jumping out on the street at you or in a dark alleyway. And so we're learning how to protect ourselves from those situations, but we're not learning how to deal with rape or sexual assault when it's occurring from people who you know.
Addressing gender inequality is really about challenging these harmful stereotypes around what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman that play into violence against women. In Australia, we know men have really high rates of depression and suicidality, and that's related to these stereotypical ideas of men needing to be tough, not being able to seek help, boys being taught that they're not supposed to cry, and they actually have really harmful ramifications, not just for women, but obviously for men themselves.
What do you say to men who might feel like, well, I can't say or do anything for fear of putting a foot wrong and being accused of being a sexual harasser?
I am really keen to encourage men to engage in this conversation. My sense is that we're at a turning point, and whilst men have told me they're confused, it's time that they engage.
To achieve true progress, all voices need to be heard, and some of those whose stories are often missing are those most at risk.
I am Gina. I have moved from Samoa in mid-90s to Australia. I live in Marrickville. People always ask me, like, are you trans? I'm like, no, first of all, I am Gina.
Hi, how you going?
Good morning, hi. Can I please get a latte, please? When I was in hospitality, I worked in pubs. People say I've got attitude, but at the same time, I want to keep the relationships between patrons and myself in a respectful manner. But somehow, it doesn't stop patrons, especially males. Ni hao! The kind of things they used to say to me, like, sexy, like, do you want to have lunch? Do you have a boyfriend? Come here. When you're beautiful or you're gorgeous, it's kind of okay. You can take it as a compliment. But when they say sexy while you're at work, it's a different narrative. And for me, it's a constant thing. It's not just like, one day a week or one shift. But me as a trans woman, I would stand there thinking, what would they say after if I reveal myself to them? I don't know how they would take it, but to me, I always think of violence.
Gina says for migrant women, speaking out against sexual harassment in a work environment can be particularly challenging.
They fear because of being judged by their own communities, and on top of that is the fear of losing employment. And I think that's what stops women from speaking out.
We found that some groups were more at risk than others. So women were in the majority, young people, LGBTI communities, people with disabilities, migrant workers, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island workers.
And we know that's because of intersecting forms of discrimination and oppression. So they are facing transphobia, sexism and racism at the same time, and that intersects to cause high rates of violence and make them particularly vulnerable.
Any society is only as good as how it treats its most vulnerable, and in this respect in Australia we have to do better.
I think we really need to question ourselves when the stories that make us angry have to come in the package of a young white woman, and that is not at all to take anything away from the likes of Brittany Higgins or Grace Tame, whose courage and power has been, instrumental in sort of bringing to light these issues. But the reality is that women of colour, Aboriginal women, trans women face much higher rates of violence, face much more discrimination, and yet their voices are not elevated. In fact, they're often silenced. And I think we really need to question ourselves about why it is that we listen to certain voices and we turn away from others.
Pick up River Echo 411.
Yeah, Romeo Echo 411.
QP 1300 147 484.
Yeah, Sierra 6881, go ahead.
My name's Jeff Harvey. I'm a senior constable with the Queensland Police Service. Calls to service in relation to domestic violence in the South Brisbane district. It can be upwards of, basically 50 calls for service a day.
Do we know if General's crews are there already?
General crews are attending Code 2, that was Code 2 lights and sirens.
Yeah. My name's Felice. I'm a specialist domestic and family violence worker. I'm an embedded worker here with the Queensland Police, and I go out on drive-alongs to help support the police officer and the aggrieved. I have seen a real trend at the moment in threats of fire and burning. There's been women who have been strangled while they're holding their newborn babies. I've seen women who have had their eye socket fractured, lots of rape, even within relationships, which I think people aren't aware actually does happen. We tend to see society's view on domestic and family violence that it's a hidden epidemic. It's not. It's every day. It's your neighbours, it's your colleagues, it's the people that you pass in the street.
My name's Faith Labaro. I have 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys.
Generally, my mornings have to start from the night before, actually. I have to clean my house, prepare everything. All the uniforms need to be in place, the bags, the lunch boxes. Everything needs to be prepared so that I will have a good morning. I will have to start cooking breakfast, like sometimes pancakes, sometimes rice, sometimes they just want wheat bigs.
Samantha, your breakfast is ready.
I probably forget to eat most of the time, but I do have my instant coffee.
Faith moved to Australia from the Philippines 10 years ago, leaving behind all of her family and networks.
I didn't know anyone, I didn't have any friends, I don't know where to go. Like, I didn't even know how to catch the bus. Get dressed, girls.
Then she ended up in a domestically abusive relationship.
I lost a lot of my confidence. I felt like I don't know what to do because I'm lost in this place. Like, I don't know where to go. I didn't have friends. I didn't have anyone to talk to apart from my family overseas that I have very limited time to talk to.
One night, Faith was left alone and terrified and pregnant.
I went out to the street and there were really, really good strangers around where we lived. And there's this lady, I still remember her. She actually, she really stood for me. It's amazing how, you can really see those strangers around who can be there for you when you're in need.
Faith had little money and there was no secure housing available, so it took a long time to break free.
That's why I went back and forth, because you feel like you can't do it. You feel like you don't have enough resources. So you go back and forth until things escalate.
Speaking out isn't easy, but Faith hopes it will help others.
For years of being controlled, I felt like I was so suffocated. I feel like I have lungs and I can breathe again. And that just allowed me to just be who I am, that I can express my experiences, I can express my thoughts, my feelings, I can share, I could encourage, I could empower women. Then now is the time to speak.
We know that violence against women is the leading cause of homelessness among women, and we know that there's not enough emergency housing or safe housing, and that makes that decision really impossible for women. They're sort of deciding between trying to keep themselves and their children safe in an unsafe home or living on the street, and that's a decision no woman should ever have to make. I mean, this is a national emergency and it needs to be treated as such.
Hannah Clark and her 3 children burnt to death by her estranged husband.
Mother of 3 was stabbed 26 times.
3 toddlers, their mother and grandmother have been confirmed as the victims of yesterday's.
Some of the people that we deal with are evil human beings. Absolutely evil human beings. And you might have the best legislation and the best policy and the fastest response. When you look at what they do to their family and their partners, and I still sit there in disbelief to comprehend that a human can do that. I don't know how you stop that on every single occasion.
Katarina Carroll, the only female police commissioner in the country, has witnessed a rising number of domestic violence cases in Queensland during her tenure.
We are going to domestic violence incidents every 2 minutes. And there are some stations and some shifts, all they do is go from one domestic violence incident to another. So you can imagine if you're constantly going to work and that's what you're dealing with. It's draining, it has a huge impact on officers. I'm heartened by the fact that people are coming forward and having that conversation, but it just doesn't start with police. It starts a long way before policing gets involved.
Violence against women and girls, unfortunately, is not an issue we can arrest our way out of. Obviously, we need to hold perpetrators to account, and that's incredibly important. But we have to really think about stopping this before it starts, and that requires addressing the root causes of violence like gender inequality and other forms of discrimination and oppression.
It is a gendered issue, whichever way you look at it. It mostly affects women and children, but men have to be part of the conversation.
The really hard truth that we have to face is if 1 in 3 women is experiencing violence, this isn't a problem of a few bad men.
My name is Aman Ibrahimzadeh. I am an anti-domestic violence campaigner. I don't have any formal qualifications in this space, but I lived in a family home which was quite abusive, quite violent for over 20 years. And I know how that violence starts. My earliest childhood memories are violent memories. And one of the first memories that come to mind is my dad picked up a hot cup of tea and spilled it over my mum.
As Aman and his sisters grew up, the violence from their father escalated.
He was reaching for the drawers where the knives were kept. So we wrestled him away from the drawers. We tried to stop him from grabbing a hold of anything to make it into a weapon. And once he saw that he couldn't arm himself, he essentially cornered us and he said, when you least expect it, I'm going to lock you all in this house and I'm going to burn the house down.
This threat was the tipping point for the family. They packed their bags and after living in their car, found safe accommodation.
So this is 12 months after we had left our family home. My mum decided to attend a Persian New Year function. I had just gone to bed and then my phone starts ringing. pick up the phone and the only words that are on the other side of the phone is, "Come down quick, your dad stabbed your mum."
Just before midnight on Persian New Year's Eve 2010, Arman rushed to the Adelaide Convention Centre where his father had stabbed his mother Zara in front of 300 people.
And I remember finally getting into this room, and maybe about 10 or 20 metres ahead of me, I could see my mum's body essentially lying in a pool of her own blood.
The Supreme Court heard that in March 2010, Zialo Abrahimzadeh went to the convention centre with a knife hidden under his jacket, then stabbed her in the back, continuing his attack when she fell to the ground.
After 22 years of abuse, my dad finally killed my mum. This is not something that happened overnight. It's essentially like the iceberg effect, where you see murder at the very top, but then beneath the waters, the disrespectful behaviour, the manipulation, financial control, financial abuse.
G'day mate, how are you? Good, thank you.
Arman says for his migrant mother, it was never as simple as just going to the police.
Good, thank you very much.
Culturally and linguistically diverse background communities are complex. And you can't have a blanket approach when it comes to dealing with this.
And then what happened? Okay.
We should engage with men, particularly younger men. Now, I myself do a lot of work at schools, at youth detention facilities, and even prisons. That's one of the things that we need to emphasise here, is that it's normal to reach out if you need some help. Be in touch with your emotions. Deal with them. Because the more you deal with them, and the better you deal with them, the better man and better person you will be.
It's a model the City Councillor wants to replicate for his own son.
So I want to make sure that I give every opportunity to Raphael that I wasn't given as a young kid myself.
Culturally and linguistically diverse communities and women from those communities are often more at risk because of barriers that they face to accessing culturally safe services.
Certainly, I do think there are compounding issues. Obviously, migrant communities, our called communities, where we do work heavily through our police liaison officers and all the other, interpreters. But can we get better at it? I definitely believe that you can.
For 3 decades, human rights lawyer Dr Hannah McGlade has worked to prevent violence against First Nations women and girls. She knows how bad this often ignored issue really is.
It's seriously bad. It's shocking. I don't think it could be any worse. We're talking about very high level of murdered Aboriginal women. We're talking about Aboriginal women being hospitalised from violence at unbelievable rates. There's a history of discrimination, of course, in this country, where Aboriginal people were treated in the most violent manner, were not citizens, and for Aboriginal women that meant a lot of gendered violence, including rape and murder, which went unpunished. So this has been an ongoing history, and even to this day we see inadequate policing responses, inadequate prosecution and inadequate justice responses. There's a real problem when the victim is Aboriginal and the perpetrator is a non-Aboriginal white man, actually.
Mainstream Australians would know the names of some high-profile victims and survivors of domestic violence, but there has been a stunning lack of attention paid to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Why do you think that is?
It does come down to racism, unfortunately. We're not having the proper conversations and commitments to addressing racism in this country. There's myths about Aboriginal women being undeserving, not the proper victim. Angry black women who don't deserve protection, who somehow bring this violence on themselves. It's really as if Aboriginal women's lives don't matter in this country.
When you think about Aboriginal communities and their histories of interactions with police that have been, racist and oppressive, they're not going to be thinking that that's maybe the safest place for them to seek help.
Break down and let it all out.
Whether it's violence or any of the other issues we've raised in this series, none of these issues alone cause entrenched female disadvantage, it's their intersection. There's probably no woman in the country, regardless of age, wealth, culture or politics, who doesn't have a combination of things making her life harder than for the comparable man. And that is why women are angry.
These sort of tipping point moments, they're founded on decades of work of hundreds of activists.
If we just keep fighting and stay loud, then we can achieve some real change.
Do you feel angry that women still experience harassment in the workplace in 2021?
Can you not tell?